Hello, everyone. This is Jessica from CorpU, and I'd like to welcome you to today's Smarter Growth webinar on how talent development ignites global strategy. Before we begin, a few housekeeping items. First, all attendees are in listen-only mode, so should you have any issues during the broadcast, please type a question into the question box and I will assist you. Secondly, today's session is being recorded and shared, so we will send you an email following today's webinar with the recording and slides and also post it to our website. Without further ado, I'd like to pass it over to Alan Todd.
All right, thank you, Jessica. Welcome to the Smarter Growth series. We focus on leadership insights rooted in management science, and today we have a great story to tell with our presenter, Lars Christensen from Agilent. So we're very excited to get this going, and they have a great story. Gartner gave them the Talent Payback of the Year award recently, I believe it's in March, so sometime in the last month. And we're going to teach you some lessons. But to frame up today, before I turn it over to Lars and before I introduce Lars, I thought I would just give us a little background on some things that I think are some of the principles of building and becoming a learning organization that Agilent does so well. And so this is ultimately, it's about a learning organization is an organization that learns how to win at learning. And I think this is a great story today. And this is about learning to win in the marketplace at learning. And people that win in the marketplace, they will be the ones that shape the learning curve. So we know that innovation and change will continue to accelerate, and through digitalization, that pace of change is never going back. It will only get steeper. And most organizations have an approach where the constraints, things like getting people to shared mindsets and getting the shared vision and getting the learning culture built, if you don't focus on those things, you'll always fail to shape the learning curve, and you'll be following the learning curve, you'll be watching the learning curve. And so what's so exciting about today's story is Lars and company at Agilent. These guys are shapers of the learning curve. They're driving that new to world innovation, and they're doing it through a learning organization. I just thought I'd take this quote. So they just put out their annual report recently, and Mike McMullen, the CEO, 2018 was a record year. I just pulled three quotes I thought were good. Our One Agilent cultural transformation promotes greater collaboration, makes it easier for customers to do business with us, and I'm committed to making Agilent an even better place to work in 2019. So if you look at those three quotes taken together, I think they're just a perfect, just an exemplary example of a learning organization. So the CEO starts right at the top. We're about changing the culture and the environment. We're about focusing on customers. We're about being a great place to work, focusing on people and the work environment. And 2018 was a record year. So no surprise, those things, that's how it works. And so some basic principles that I want to take you through is how do you think about becoming a learning organization in a 21st century world? Well, you have to move the way you think about strategy and implementation and change and learning and development from tactical to strategic. And so it's about moving from doing things always in an analog way to doing them in a digital way. So if you're thinking about strategy activation and driving change, you've got to move from analog to digital so that you can get to more people and drive the change deeper into the organization and across the world. And you have to move from monologue to dialogue, because it's through dialogue that people go from vision to shared vision. So it's only through dialogue that you get there. So it's really important to have a structured dialogue system and process built by which everybody feels like they're part of the change effort. Everybody feels like they're engaged. And then you've got to move from gut-driven decision-making to data-driven decision-making. So it's important when leading change and leading learning and development that there's evidence-based practices that you can point to that show how you're creating these business results. How are you winning at learning, and how is that enabling you to win at business? That's the key to that data-driven system. And all of this needs to be dynamic, not static. So the world has changed. If you have a static plan and you expect to just implement it for the next 2 or 3 years, you're destined to struggle. A dynamic plan requires a dynamic culture and a dynamic environment where people can bob and weave and change and learn, and that'll get you there. And so I just thought, as I think about mindsets, Jeff Bezos wrote his letter to shareholders last week, and he said the key to driving new innovation for them is that their experts start with a beginner's mind. And a beginner's mind is a mindset where you are open and curious about learning new things every day. And it comes from Zen Buddhism. So a beginner's mind is from the Zen Buddhism tradition. Shoshin is the word that they use that means a beginner's mind. And it's very similar to some of the Stoic and Greek philosophies. Socrates said, I know one thing, and that is that I know nothing. And so it's important. Socrates had a beginner's mindset, and the way he learned was by approaching every day, curiously, driving, asking questions of every person that he encountered. And that's kind of a key. And Epictetus, about 300 years after Socrates, said, he was a famous Stoic philosopher, it's impossible for man to learn what he thinks he already knows. And in the beginner's mind, there are many possibilities. In the expert's mind, there are few. And this quote tells us that if you think you are an expert, you're destined to fail, you won't be innovative, and you won't learn. And finally, when Satya Nadella took over at Microsoft, the one thing that he identified deep into the culture was that they had a lot of really smart people, but they had developed some hubris, and they needed a giant dose of humility. And he coined the phrase that he borrowed from a famous psychologist named Carol Dweck, don't be a know-it-all, be a learn-it-all. And finally, for learning to work, you need to have an environment where critical debate and permission to speak freely, admit mistakes, and to be vulnerable are the behavioral norms in the business, and they can't be penalized. And I love this quote by Maslow, which is, an individual engages in learning to the extent that they're not crippled by fear and they feel safe enough to dare. And I think that that sentence right there for me gets to the heart of what it means to be a learning organization, which is an organization that learns faster than all of its competitors. It shapes the learning curve. It serves customers better. It launches products faster. And it creates winning results in the marketplace. And finally, because at Agilent, and the CEO report, it said, we're building a great place to work and changing the work environment. I just wanted to make the final point that behavior is a function of people and the environment. So you can't focus on training individuals when you're driving change. You have to focus on both developing people and changing the work environment at the same time. If you change one without the other, you won't get the results you hope. So with that, I am going to turn it over to Lars Christensen from Agilent to begin telling us the story of Agilent's transformation. So Lars, I'm trying to pull up this deck, but if you're there, can you say hi to everybody?
I definitely can. Hi, Alan, and hi, everybody. Thanks for joining the call today. Excited to get started here.
Yeah, give me 2 more seconds here. There we go. Apologize for that delay. All right, Lars, take it away. Tell us about your strategy and talent development.
Yeah, absolutely. And thanks a lot, Alan, and thanks everybody on the call for joining today. I hope that the next 30, 45 minutes or so will be insightful for all of you. And obviously, I look very much forward to the dialogue both here and also if any of you have questions afterwards, feel free to reach out. But before I get started on the actual presentation, we thought it would be a good idea to get you all a little bit engaged and right out of the gate here. So as you can tell from the title of the presentation that I will talk about, it's all around how we in Agilent manufacturing supply chain organization have been developing and implementing, driving our global strategy through what I would call a direct tie to learning and development. And that has been, amongst others, through our partnership with CorpU. So with that in mind, I was just curious to see and get a sense for how all of you have been working with this in your organization. So, Alan, if you can run the poll here, that would be great.
Yep. All right. Let's get the poll, folks. Get voting. It's time to make this interactive. So we're watching 18%, 25%, 36%. Keep going, folks. Get your vote in. We want to know how aligned learning and development to a business strategy. Really important topic, one we've been paying attention to for a long, long time, and obviously it's very tricky. Okay, let's go 5 more seconds. Get your vote in. 5. All right. Let's close the poll and look at the results. So Lars, what do you make of this?
Yeah, no, I think this is a very interesting picture, Alan, and obviously one of the reasons why we wanted to test this out too, because I think that one of the things that you'll hear from me a little bit is how I believe that tying strategy and learning and development has made a ton of difference from how we have been successful with our strategy, both from a development perspective and implementation perspective in Agilent. So I'm not surprised. I think about the results here, I think most of organizations have a strategy function, whether that's a corporate strategy function or a supply chain strategy function, and then you have learning and development sitting mainly in HR. We have a great corporate learning function as well, but what we have done is really building out our own little internal manufacturing supply chain organization that coincidentally sits as a part of my team. So it is super tied to how we develop and implement our strategy. So not surprised here, but some really good stats. So thanks for participating, everybody.
Yeah, and I think if you look at that, it's really interesting. It's kind of a bell curve. But you've got 95% of the people do not believe that their learning strategy is tightly aligned or tightly integrated with business strategy, which I think is interesting. And the mass middle is loosely aligned and mostly aligned, which I think is positive. And then of course there's the tail, the not aligned tail. But I think what it tells us is that there's a lot of room to get better, not just individually with organizations, but really building tools and frameworks and methods for how organizations can get better doing this. And I think, Lars, your story today and your teaching today is a perfect example of helping people move down this process. And I forgot to mention this, but I would love to take your questions, folks, if you would put them in the question box, and I will feed those to Lars as we're going along. So anytime you have a question, fill them out. Okay, back to you, Lars.
Yeah, no, thanks for that. And I think just another quick note on the question and the input. If you ask another question around how well do you understand your corporate strategy, that would be another interesting data point, right? To see those where you don't have a tight connection between your L&D piece and your strategy development. How well do people actually understand and engage in strategy? So that would be another interesting ask, but we can do that another day. But so yep. What I will talk a little bit about today is what I will call our 2-step transformation journey in our part of the organization. And the first part will be a little bit of a journey overview of where we came from and how we have worked with strategy to drive our first wave of transformation, whereas the second part of the presentation is around our latest advancement of our strategic approach with an even larger element of combining strategy with learning and development. So as a service to all of you, I do promise that at the end of the presentation we'll have the exact same slide. So should my Danish/English, also known as Dinglish, not be crystal clear all the way through, hopefully this will help you remember the key elements of the deck here. But without going into all the details of this slide, what we are seeing in our organization is that the value drivers from our first wave of transformation that will deliver diminishing returns going forward. So we simply have to find new ways of creating value. Our classical supply chain levers such as logistics optimization, procurement transformation, continuous improvement, all of those will continue to drive great value, but not to the extent that they did in the past. So we need to find new ways of creating value, and we have basically set a goal to our employees and our organization of finding ways of doubling our capacity with the same amount of headcount in 5 years. So that's kind of the overarching goal. Another important part here is that when you combine the word digital and transformation, which is our current and second wave of transformation, if you will, this can scare a lot of people away, especially in a manufacturing and supply chain environment where you are afraid of robots taking over your work. So we have had a ton of focus around the notion of leaving no one behind, and we'll talk a little more about that later. And then finally, a couple of key points from the right-hand side of the slide that are important to highlight is that we could not have done what we are going through right now had we not been through the first steps of our transformation journey with a strong and rigorous strategy process. So the point being, don't try to do digital before you fix the basics, and never forget core. So before we dig into our strategy on the next slide here, I just thought I would spend 1 minute on telling you a little bit about Agilent. Since Agilent is not necessarily a well-known consumer brand, which I know that many of your companies are, but we do have a very rich history. So Agilent spun off from Hewlett-Packard back in 1999. Back then it was, I believe it was the biggest IPO back then in Silicon Valley. There's been a few fairly big ones since then, but Agilent was initially highly focused around electronic test measurements while also growing our life sciences business. And if you then fast forward to 2014, that actually resulted in us splitting up the company in two separately traded companies, where the original electronic measurement part of the company is now called Keysight Technologies, completely independent from Agilent, whereas Agilent today is a market leader solely focusing on life sciences, diagnostics, and applied chemical markets. So we serve laboratories around the world in these 6 distinct customer segments that you see at the top here. And you can read on the right-hand side, the manufacturing supply chain footprint side. You can see that we are fairly well distributed globally, so we are a true global organization. And talking about that on the next slide, that is really how we are structured from a manufacturing and supply chain organization. So we've structured us around 3 centers of excellences that are manufacturing focused. So the blue ones in the middle there, and these are really manufacturing sites with similar characteristics. For example, sites that produce instruments or chemistries. And then we have the 4th center of excellence, which is our global supply chain, making sure that everything that goes into the factories is there and everything being delivered to our customers is there on time. So those are the 4 centers of excellence. Aside from that, we have global process areas and our support functions that are truly critical for us to drive a global approach to everything from quality, process improvements, people, etc. And the reason why I share this slide is that this is not how we were structured when this first 2-step transformation journey started. So keep that in mind. And if you skip to the next slide, this is a little bit of the journey slide, if you will. So in 2014-15, that was really around globalizing the organization from a structural perspective. So prior to 2014, manufacturing supply chain did not look the way it just did on the previous slide. It was embedded in the different product lines. So this all started with actually adding it under one global umbrella. And back then, our strategic approach in those early days of transformation was kind of a classical top-down driven exercise with, again, all the classical roadshows, webcasts, and fancy slides. And as such, there's nothing wrong with that, but to me, we were missing 2 critical elements. First of all, the first year we did this, it took us 4 months to fly around the world and get this implemented. And that meant that we basically lost 4 months of aligned execution time. So that didn't work. And secondly, all you know what it's like being in a big town hall meeting, and you rarely get a ton of questions. So I simply did not know if people got it, what kind of questions they had, what we were not communicating well enough, and where we needed to improve. So that is basically why we already in the second year of this partnered with CorpU on activating our strategy very differently and more efficiently than we did in the past. So in the second part there, the 2016 to 17, we drove a true one global strategy process, much more focused on employee engagement, learning and development, and this is also where we started to see the results, the value of some of these classical transformation programs that we had launched in the previous years. Again, logistics, procurement, value engineering programs, starting to see the value of those at a global scale. What we then launched last year in 2018, and we are deeply involved in right now, is what we're calling our next generation supply chain. And that has a much more focus on a digital push, technology exploration, as well as this part about never forgetting core. So that's the history lesson of today. If you skip to the next slide, I wanted to spend a little bit of time explaining our strategy and how we have done it. This is really what you will hear me talking about as our power of one strategy, which has been the foundation for the first part of our transformational journey and that we still use today. Our philosophy around an approach to strategy has always been that we wanted to ensure that all who are just slightly interested to know where they fit in and they can understand the strategy, they can get to that. We need high level KPIs, aspirations, concrete strategic initiatives to support that. So that has been our approach. And what you see on the slide here is the OFS power of one. And it basically consists of these three simple ones that have not changed the last 4 or 5 years. We want to have and act as one company, as all supply chains, quality and delivery performance is on the forefront. And finally, our contribution to the shareholders and the company of driving gross margin improvements continues. So this is basically what we have asked in the last 4 years, all of our employees to remember. And if they remember nothing else around strategy, then remember this one here. But obviously, since we are in operations, we take this to the next level. We have worked with a rigorous strategy framework and created our execution engine that you have on the next slide here. So on the left-hand side of this slide, this is basically our strategic roadmap, and it is based on 3 levels of strategy. In our organization, we talk strategy at blue, green, and purple level, just to make it simple. And everybody in our organization today know what that means when we are sharing our green level strategy as an example. So on this slide here, this is an example of a poster that is hanging all around the world at all our sites. I think this one is from Italy, where employees, they can go up and they can look at their site-specific strategies and plans, their projects that they are involved in, and the KPIs that they support to deliver on. And then they can then clearly see how these roll up to a divisional level priorities at the green level, and all the way up to the corporate blue level with strategic priorities and KPIs for the next 3 years. So that is the essence of our Power of One strategic roadmap. On the right-hand side, this is what we have called our strategy execution model, and consists of these 4 different elements at the 2 levels: the development and implementation, the upper part, and the lower part around portfolio and execution. We just talked about the strategic framework, but we then have what I believe is our true differentiator, which is called strategy activation. And this is really where we have our learning and development focus tied to our strategy. The combination, as I said in the beginning, of owning strategy as well as the L&D part of our organization has truly allowed us to both align our direction with how we teach and include people. And then the bottom part of the execution model is critical as well. This is where we have our PMO, where we track all our strategic initiatives. We have a fantastic group of strategy execution leads in the execution forum that they work in the different functions, and I have the pleasure of having them as a part of my extended team, where they drive the local and functional execution of strategy and plans. So in the essence, this is the Power of One strategy, and how we have been driving this fairly rigorous process the last several years. And if you skip to the next slide, the reason why I just wanted to spend a little bit of time on those previous 2 slides is there's again no way we could have done what we are doing now had we not been as mature as we are from a strategy and execution perspective. So the next couple of slides are really around what we launched last year, Next Generation OFS, and the first piece around why we are having this focus. So all of you are well aware that all of your customers are expecting to engage with you in ways that are very different from just a couple of years ago, and that will continue in the future. At least where I live, I rarely go to the grocery store anymore. In fact, last night at 9 p.m., I was ordering my groceries on Amazon Fresh, and at 6:30 a.m. this morning, they were sitting on my doorstep. Right, that is the expectation that our both current, but definitely our future customers also have from how they engage professionally with companies like yours and Agilent. And I think it's fair to say that we're not quite there yet. New technologies obviously are being developed quicker than ever before. So we have to find structural approaches where we can explore these to find out which will be critical to invest in, and also make sure that we don't miss the boat on any new technologies that could potentially disrupt our field. Finally, I'm sure you're all well aware of the insane amount of data that is being created every single year, and just the fact that in the past 12 and maybe it's 9 months now, Alan, you probably know that better than I do, but in the last 9 to 12 months, we've created more data in the world than in all previous history, or in all previous years in the history of the world, right? So basically, that's
why that change curve keeps going steeper, Lars.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And so what we have communicated to our organization is we have to find ways where we can leverage technology and digitalization to deliver more with the same. And this is an important point, because what we're doing here is not a cost-cutting exercise that a lot of people are used to from a supply chain organization. This is all about how we can do more with the same. And again, as I mentioned in the beginning, we have told our organization we want to be able to deliver double amount of value out of all our factories in 5 years with the same amount of headcount. So that has been the change challenge for us. So if you skip to the next slide, what you are seeing here is basically our evolved strategic framework. So from the power of one, those 3 number ones that I shared earlier, they're still there. And we have moved this into an advanced strategic model where we keep the focus on core, our 1 to 3 year strategy execution engine. But we are now adding a digital everyday focus, a digital mindset, as well as a structured approach to exploring for new technologies that are out there. And a couple of key points here. This is not a project, and this is not a program. This is truly a journey toward a higher state of mind, if you will. And it's a different way of leading, and it's a different way of thinking for all of us. And I know that this is a little fluffy, especially difficult in at least I believe in our part of the world, in a supply chain organization where, all of us and all of my colleagues, they are exceptionally good at executing the heck out of everything that they do every single day and find out how can we be done on Friday at 3:30. And this is the complete opposite. We still have that element as the core, but the other part is around changing a mindset, problem solving with a digital lens. It's about being okay with spending time on scouting for technologies and solutions to problems that we don't necessarily have just yet. So it's a very different approach than what we normally do. On the next slide is basically our advanced strategic framework. So as you can see here, the power of one that we just talked about, that stays. That's still important for us to execute on our day-to-day and 1 to 3 year priorities. And I think you all know of companies who have failed miserably in their digital transformation because they have ended up spending 50% of their employees' time thinking big thoughts and innovating, and then forgetting core. So that doesn't fly. So that has to stay. We are then adding what we are calling the OFS compass as the yellow part, which is basically our structured framework for technology exploration that looks 3 to 10 years out, in contrast to our standard 3-year execution model. And this has been based on investigating hundreds of mega trends that we have then chosen 4 that we believe will be critical for us to focus on in the years to come. And one of these we have chosen to call workforce of the future. And there might be a bright person on the call here who's going to say, well, that's all good and fine, Lars, but that is not a mega trend. And you're absolutely right. But we have simply chosen to make it one because we believe that if we don't focus on workforce of the future at the highest possible level, along with artificial intelligence and automation, etc., and we don't make the needed changes, then it doesn't matter how cool technologies we introduce or how much we invest in digital solutions if we don't have the people and the skill set along to harness the value of those investments. So this is one of the areas where we again have deliberately chosen to merge strategy and talent development. And then finally, we are adding what we call digital everyday. And we have again deliberately not call this a digital strategy. We actually believe that we have a solid strategy, but what we do need to do is to digitize our strategy. So this is again about getting our entire organization to a higher state of mind where every problem has a digital solution. And then we might choose not to go with that digital solution because it's insanely expensive or technology is not there yet, but that is where we need to go. So in other words, everything that we execute on in the Power of One strategy, our 3-year plan, and everything that we scout for in our compass, that should really be seen through a digital lens. The next slide is kind of the business view on this, and back to the challenge ahead of us that I shared in the introduction. That's really what you see here on the left-hand side. You have our previous strategy that through classical supply chain levers has been very successful in delivering millions in savings and value creation to the bottom line every single year. But as I mentioned, over time, these will see diminishing returns. So again, as you see at the bottom, traditional levers will not go away, but they won't generate the same amount of value. And I can guarantee you that our CEO and that you saw a quote from the beginning, and our CFO, they definitely expect us to continue to deliver that same amount of value. So we have to find new levers. And again, that will be our future value creation framework that you see there on the model, where we are adding the digital everyday and the compass to that. So before I move on and share how we have initiated our journey, and maybe also for me to catch my breath here, I thought it would be interesting to hear from all of you how your organizations have been approaching your digital transformation, if at all. So if we could please run the poll here.
All right, here we go. All right, folks, poll is open and the counts are coming.
Excellent.
20%, 30%. Keep going. All right, how about five more seconds, 7 more seconds, keep going. 40%, 50%. 60%. All right, let's one more second. All right, let's close the poll and see where we are.
All right. Excellent.
So what do you make of this, Lars?
No, I think, and you know, what you'll hear from me in a bit is there's no right or wrong here. I was just curious to see the approaches. I think obviously the top-down large-scale transformation is not necessarily surprising, and I think a lot of organizations have that approach. I think the both top-down and bottom-up is what I'll talk a little bit about, and how we have approached that. So again, I think it's still early days, right? I think all companies are talking digital transformation. We are yet to see some of the longer-term results of some of that. So I think it's a nice split. Obviously, I think that if there are areas where you're saying you're not digitizing at all, I would suggest you get started. Because I do
Lars,
think that is
I have just a question for you. So because you either have to be top down or bottom up, and I think the idea here was that you had to pick which one of those two are you more dominant in your method. I'm speaking for the audience, and then unless you pick the last one, both top down, bottom up, in which case had to be kind of a 50-50 split. One didn't dominate the other. And I know you're going to talk about this for you all, but I assume you put yourself in the bottom category. Is that fair?
Yeah, that would be fair. And I think there's probably a maturity part to it as well, and as well as an organizational culture you need to have respect for. So all of these can work. But yes, I look at the way we approach it as a both top down. It was definitely highly top down driven in the beginning, but it was really to get a bottom up grassroots engagement. However, I do think we need more some of these large scale transformation programs going forward, which we are working on right now.
Well, and I think there's a lesson in that. I think because even at Agilent, you just said it at the beginning, you are top down. I mean, there is some kind of a large scale vision. There's a transformational vision. At some point, someone has to put a stake in the ground and say, this is where we're going. And then I think then what you all did was then very rapidly converted to a top down, bottom up approach, which ultimately is the optimal, because I think just from a learning organization perspective, I believe it's the business leader's job and the learning leader's job, and you've done this so well, to create the conditions and shape the environment for learning to occur, so people can change behavior and change the environment. But in the end, creating conditions and shaping the environment is some of the top-down stuff, but actually getting people to learn and change their behavior and do new things and drive gross margin improvements, that has to happen. That's a cultural thing. That's every person. That's bottom up.
Correct. So yeah, and you can't have everybody involved in building strategy either, right? So,
right.
So part of it has to happen top down. So no, fully agree, Alan. And so what I'll talk a little bit about is how we have done it more concretely with initiatives that we launched last year. And again, everybody remember that we literally just started this in May last year and rolled it out over the summer. So this is still somewhat new. We're still learning a lot. So what you'll see on the next slide is the first 3 out of 6 concrete initiatives that we launched. So again, the entire framework, the structure, all of that was developed top down. What we then went out and did was to make sure that we could engage our full organization to get that grassroots engagement. And that these 6 elements that you'll see now has been launched in the last 12 months, really. So we already talked about the compass, where we explore for new technologies. We have 4 think tanks that are headed up by the people who also run the divisions in OFS, and that is important because that's the balance between core and focusing on the future. And over time, these different pilots and strategic initiatives that come out of that will turn into projects. This is also where our employees get engaged in incubators to investigate and look for new technologies that are within their interest of FAIR. So then we have launched a collaboration and knowledge sharing platform. We call that the Future Lab, where people get connected, they discuss. One of the critical parts here is our crowdsourcing effort, where we have told our employees that they now have direct impact on the future direction of our organization, and that we need their help basically to evolve. We rolled this out and said, if we can be 60% right out of the gate, we will be more than happy, and then we need all their feedback and help to make it even better every single year. But we basically asked them to submit ideas supporting our new strategic agenda around technology exploration and digital solutions. And I'm very happy that last year alone, that actually resulted in 26 ideas coming in from our workforce that we translated directly into strategic initiatives that ended up on our 3-year plan. And this is important because these are initiatives that we would not have had without this approach. So that obviously made me happy. And the third part here is we've launched our innovation playgrounds globally. So again, a corporate push, if you will, saying we need innovation playgrounds. But what we did was we asked our local site leadership teams to define what do they look like locally, because they know the culture, they know their people, they know their sites. And this is currently popping up all over the place as either physical spaces where digital solutions are on display, it's virtual forums, it's even hackathons that are being created, and all of these to make sure that we can demystify digital and make it visible what it is and nothing to be afraid of. So on the next slide, you have the additional 3 things that we launched. We asked for volunteers as we rolled this out to become digital champions. I think it's fair to say we never expect to see as many volunteers to step up as we did. And these are really passionate employees that support the local innovation playgrounds. They communicate digital solutions every day. They facilitate everything from, they've come up with the notion of digital carnivals, which is super cool, and hackathons. So all of these are now connected globally, and we really harness the ideas from all around the world from this strong network. I think we have more than 150 of them right now. I'll talk more about the School of Digital Innovation in a bit, but to make this a success, we had to launch this School of Digital Innovation, and the first 2 phases are now launched, and soon to come we have 2 more. And since we launched it just 6 months ago, we have 50% of our workforce are engaged in this in one shape or the other, and more than 1,000 employees have actually achieved certification for this. So this is taking off like wildfire, and I'll share a little more about that in a bit. And then finally, we have we also know that we can't do this alone. We need to develop ecosystems to basically tap into the best and the brightest, whether that is suppliers, startups, universities, and as you can see, this is not fully launched yet. So, but I do imagine that we will have ecosystem both at a kind of a global and a local level. So that is still under development. So before I talk about some of the results, the next slide is called the OFS Academy, and this is I just wanted to share this high-level overview with you because the OFS Academy is really the umbrella for all learning and development in the manufacturing supply chain part of Agilent. And this is everything from including specific courses to different levels of certification and develop different schools. And I have a brilliant lady, Lily Wong, working for me, who is the brain behind all of this. So she deserves all the credit. But what you see on the screen here is just a few of the examples, including our flagship top talent program in end-to-end supply chain management, where we work with CorpU and Penn State, and it's based on Penn State's MBA in supply chain management. We have the School of Continuous Improvement that drives a fantastic grassroots culture of continuous improvement locally, and everybody who graduates from that will see that in a bit. They deliver concrete benefits along with their graduation. We have Best Places to Work program. We have Strategy Activation that I told you about earlier, which is truly how we are igniting our strategy through including all levels of the organization from a learning and development perspective. And then, as I mentioned on the previous slide, we have a School of Digital Innovation. And it has been launched not to give anybody a PhD in digital, but really for all of us to get 5-10% smarter, better, and faster when it comes to thinking and working digital. So within that School of Digital Innovation, you can take individual classes, for example, in an introduction to AI or neural networks, if that's exciting for you, or how you work better in Office 365. And you can also choose to go through an actual curriculum and then graduate at various levels, both as an individual contributor, and we have graduation levels for people managers within digital leadership. One area that I'm especially excited about here is, and it's back to what I mentioned on my introduction slide, is what we're calling No One Left Behind program that we are in the process of launching. And after a successful pilot that was done by a great team here in the US, we're now rolling this out globally. So this is really around computer essentials, where we have found that we obviously have a lot of people in manufacturing supply chain who are not in front of a computer every day and not necessarily familiar with Word and Excel, etc. So this program is all about facilitating local computer essentials training, which in some cases start with, this is Windows, here's Word, here's Excel, and here's what you can use it for. And that is really important when we're thinking about taking all of our organization along on this journey. So what we have told everybody very openly is that as a part of this next wave of transformation, digital transformation, all we're asking them to do is to be willing to change. If you're willing to change, then we will provide all the tools and training and find time for them to take part in this journey. And I actually think that message is really important to be as direct with as you can. So the final slide here is on just some of the early results. And if you click one more time, I won't spend a lot of time here, but the initial part of our transformation on the left-hand side with more classical supply chain efficiency programs, that has resulted in some what we consider as some really good performance in several areas. And if you click the slide one more time, some of the stats here show that at the bottom, they really show that you have a strong learning and development culture and the tie to strategy as being important for that. For the new part of our transformation journey into the digital era, we have definitely seen a significant increase in people seeking graduation in various programs. Continuous improvement has run for years, but is still a great one that continues to drive a ton of value, where each graduation is linked to tangible benefits, either as hard or soft savings. And I think we've yet to see many more results from the School of Digital Innovation as an example, but the interest there is pretty overwhelming. And I have no doubt that this is where our combination of top down and bottom up is critical for all of our people to get on board and get reskilled. And then I think we'll be able to drive true digital transformation, larger scale programs if we want to, when we have the talent on board too. So with that, if you skip to the next slide, I promise you to get back to this one. If there were pieces that I skipped over a little too quickly, then hopefully this kind of summarizes some of the key points that I have. So that's it, and I will look forward to all your questions and comments.
All right. Thank you, Lars. Folks, if you would type your questions into the question box at this point, I'll take some questions. And so, Lars, I want to start with one that you have a business goal, double the output with the same headcount, and that I've seen organizations do that and or set a goal to this effect, and then I've seen negativity creep into the culture where there's kind of a cynicism, which is we're just going to have to work more, or companies. I've seen it on the negative side when companies have downsized. The people left have to work more, and they get dispirited about it. So I'm wondering how are you all managing culture to be positive and upbeat and find new and innovative ways to double output with the same headcount, but make the work environment great along the way for everyone?
Yeah, that's a tough one, Alan, and I think obviously there's a major difference from when you're in a growth situation versus a downsizing situation. So Agilent is growing, and we're in a really good place. That helps. But I do think it's also around creating, and that's part of what we did, especially with our innovation playgrounds. It's about demystifying that this is not a headcount cutting exercise, right? And sharing those examples. So we are getting a lot better at sharing examples where we have employees that 2 years ago they did a very different job than they do today, in the sense that there might have been people putting caps and bottles for 8 hours a day. Today they are now running 2 to 3 robots that do that for them, and they have updated their skill sets. But to show them that this person still has a really, really good job, and hopefully a more fulfilling job, while also have doubled or tripled the capacity out of that specific part of a work environment. So I think that's one side of it. And the other side of it comes down to education, that we are both transparent with what we're trying to do. We're also humble about that we don't have all the answers and we need their help. But the last part I mentioned here around being willing to change, and then we will provide the tool sets and the training needed. I think that is an important part of that journey too.
Yeah, I think you made some really incredible points that I'll just underscore with respect to when we look at the research and the literature on learning organizations or building organizational learning. I mean, nothing supports that better than transparency and humility. And you said we're being transparent, we're being humble, meaning by humility or humble, we don't know everything. Back to we're willing to learn it all, as opposed to be a know-it-all, and we're willing to change. So I think when you have senior leaders that are modeling those behaviors, obviously that's a great example. And one thing I've noticed with our CorpU Open program, so we have these, I know you run a lot of programs like the Penn State program inside your company for Agilent in closed cohorts as people are working on certificate programs and so on. But we also we run those same programs at CorpU for multi-company and CorpU Open, and Agilent is, I think you guys might be the number one sender of people to our open program. So you just have a a phenomenal learning culture, and you can see it baked in, and the results, I see them, which leads me to a question that we have from Robin. Where do you find industry benchmarks for strategies and priorities? Goes on to say your feedback shows outstanding results.
A couple of different sources, and actually I will say that CorpU has helped with part of that on especially when you talk about strategy activation. So obviously some of the data points come from CorpU, where we have can look at benchmarks from other of your clients, but then we also run Agilent Cross-wide runs leadership surveys once or twice a year, and some of those specific questions in there, they are taken out of, they are directly related to industry benchmarks, and that can be everything from employee satisfaction and engagement. There are areas that we specifically focus on for our part of the organization around strategy, and there are different sources for comparing. Again, do I understand strategy? And I think for the specific part around strategy, I would say that CorpU is a good resource for some of that. On more leadership benchmark skills, I don't know the exact sources, but I'll be happy to help finding out.
Great, thank you for that. And if we need to answer more on that, Robin, we can, or get you connected up with Lars. And just a follow-on question from Rob: What aspects of change management saw the greatest positive impact for employees?
Oh, that's a good question. I think in this last year where we launched Next Generation OFS, I do think that being humble about it all and being, yes, it was driven top down, but we did ask people for help. We launched this fairly quickly. It was pretty big and bold. And when we got on stage, or when we were on a activation sprint, we openly shared, look, this might be right, it might be wrong, but we need you to be on board, and we need your open feedback and input to make this even better. I think that's one side of it. Another part of it was we also communicated pretty clearly that and this is back to the crowdsourcing piece and that connecting people globally, we shared pretty openly that we did not need consultants to come in and drive and help us doing all of this. If we could connect and tap into the collective brain power of all of our employees, we thought, and still do think, that we are much better off, because they know the business, they know our culture, but we need their help. Right? And I think those two combined, that has definitely given us a lot of credibility, as well as also changing course. So we have had areas, and still do areas, where we're not super successful with some of this, and we will redo it and let people know.
Yeah, that's beautiful too. I mean, our whole mission at CorpU is to help you and others harness the collective genius. Like, we always have this fundamental belief here that all of the ideas you need to drive innovation in your company, to drive change, and to solve your most complex burning issues, all of the expertise you need to do all of those things exists somewhere in the business, and you guys have, you're living proof of that. So let's move on. This may be our last question, so, and it's complex, but I just want to think this through. You talked a little bit about what I would call human machine symbiosis. So as you start to automate things in the factory, you change the roles of the people. So it's not about eliminating jobs and replacing them with machines. I think people worry about that, but I want to frame this question from Matthias. And here is the question: all the digital trends are impacting your transformation. How have you incorporated customer needs and the anthropological trends of postmodern society, always from the customer business perspective? So here's the question: have you considered having your customers in co-creation mode with you towards these trends?
So the short answer to that is yes. Are we doing it? Not really, and I have two reasons for that. So first of all, we do have kind of the customer front and center, but we can still do that a lot more, and we need to. But I think we look at customers from two different perspectives, being a supply chain and manufacturing environment, right? We have internal customers who are the P&L organizations that we deliver the products for. And when we launched what we're doing right now, we deliberately went out and said, this is a manufacturing supply chain initiative only to start with, even the crowdsourcing piece. And we also told our friends on in the other parts of the businesses that we would share everything with them, so they knew what was going on. But it was for manufacturing supply chain individuals only to start with, simply because we did not know if it was going to work. Now we have come, 12 months further down that journey. We have shared it a lot broader with the rest of the organization. We are starting to form more concrete relationships and maybe not programs just yet, but focus areas with other parts of the business. So that is happening. On the end customer side, I don't think I have a good answer for you there. We are, in all our strategy work, we always focus on results that should have in customer impact and focus. But we have not broadened this out to be an external event just yet from a digital transformation perspective. But that's a great idea and input, and something we'll think more about.
Yep, thanks for that. And final question, Lars, can you talked about core a bunch of times, then you talked about compass, which I think compass is your sort of term for creating the space for innovation and scouting. You talked about exploration. Can you talk a little bit, how much time, what's the resource allocation between these two things? One is running your business today, and one's running it for tomorrow. Is it 80-20, 90-10, 50-50? How would you sort of rate the amount of time and effort and energy that your collective whole puts into those two things?
So first of all, I'll give you a short answer, and that depends. And the slightly longer answer is, I cannot tell you how many times we have been getting this question from our leaders around the world as we rolled this out, and I completely get it. But what we have done is we have not set out directions. We have not told that everybody that now you are allowed to do 5, 10, or 20% thinking or scouting or innovation. What we have done is that the people who are responsible for the compass, and you're absolutely correct, Alan, that is where that's our structured approach to exploring new technologies. The people who are responsible for each of the 4 think tanks in that business and in that area, those are the 4 same people who are overall responsible for running the business. And I think that is important because they know when you need to scale up and down. So obviously, when we need to focus on getting stuff out of the door, that should be our core focus. I don't want 50% of our organization running around thinking big thoughts when we need to get stuff out of the door to our customers. So we've pushed that out as a leadership task to say, we expect you to find time for your employees to take part in this, but we're not going to tell you that you have 5% wildcard or 20% wildcard to spend time on this. That is a leadership decision to be made locally. Right?
Beautiful. Well said. Well said. And we'll close on that. Lars Christensen, the Global Leader of Strategy and Transformation for Agilent. Thanks so much for being with us today. Thanks, everybody, for your time and attention out of your busy schedules. So, Lars, thanks again from all of us in the CorpU world in the Smarter Growth series.
Thanks, Alan. Thanks, everybody, for being online. Appreciate it.
Yep. All righty.
Bye.
Bye-bye. Thanks.